Also, da Thomas, also, da, 那么我这边继续，新西兰语，
First of all, I would like to offer my greetings to all of the listeners of our teaching on the Audio Chenma Spring Dharma teachings, as with all the nuns who are listening, as well as all the members of the Sangha, all of the men and women all over the world who are listening. And today we will continue the teachings. Now, the other day we spoke about the 17th stanza of the 50 Gurus. So to correlate it with Lord Tsongkhapa's outline, we're speaking about making offerings. In terms of the subtopics of making offerings, so for the subtopics, there are four. Making offerings to purify disrespect, offering everything you own, why this is reasonable, and how to continually keep the three samayas. So yesterday we spoke about the first two of these subtopics. That was the 16th and the 17th stanzas. If we correspond that to the quote from Maitreya's Ornament of Mahayana Sutras, it says, which says, serve the spiritual friend with respect, gifts, service, and practice. These are related to serving the Guru with gifts. So to continue with the topic of making offerings, as is explained in the 50 stanzas on the Guru, I'd like to speak on the topic of why this is reasonable. So we've gone through the first and the second subtopic. So today we've come to the third subtopic, the reason why this is reasonable. So that is the point that we've come to. And so this is the verse. For they give in this very lifetime to those who strive the Buddhahood that's difficult to attain in even 10 million uncountable eons. When we talk about the textual exploration of following the Guru, that is the interpretation in the Sanskrit commentary. It says that the reason for teaching this is because it teaches the reason for being especially respectful of the Guru. So it teaches, this verse teaches the reason for being especially respectful of the Guru. And so, regarding this, Lord Tsongkhapa's commentary says, so why is the reason why you must please him by offering yourself even as a servant? So why should you offer everything from your own body and upwards and ask up to even offering your own self? Then ask what is the reason for it? And so that this is to answer that question. So that is the reason why this stanza is taught. Now, if we speak about the meaning of this, if we talk about it first according to the Sanskrit commentary, the interpretation of the Sanskrit commentary is that when it says for, it means for what reason? And then difficult to attain means that because it is attained through hardship and suffering, and you have to disregard a lot of hardship and suffering, it is difficult to attain. And so, in how long a time? It says in 10 million aeons. And to talk about the 10 million eons, 10 million unkillable, if we count the go from 1, 10, 15, it goes. So if you go out to the 10th place, the eighth place would be 10 million. So 10 million is the 10th place when you count from the ones, tens, thousands, hundreds, thousands, tens, thousands, hundred thousands, millions, and to the Now, there's some discussions of there's some differences in the counting systems in Tibetan. If one word comes earlier than the other, but so here at this point, what we're speaking about is we're talking about going to the 10th, so the ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, millions, and then 10 million. So we're talking about that 10 million. So it says it's the eighth place, right? And if you continue to kind of count out on this, then you get to the level of the 60 places is uncountable. That is one uncountable. And so it's both 10 million and it's also uncountable. So it's 10 million uncountable eons. So 10 million at a time is 10 to the 60th uncountable eons. So it takes 10 million uncountable three uncountable eons to achieve Buddhahood, according to the Hinayana. When we want to calculate how long a great eon is, so how many eons does it take? How many great eons does it take? So how long a time does it take to do that? Now, there are many different discussions of this in the Creator and Foundation vehicles, and we talk about how long a great eon is. There's a lot to say about this, and we don't need to go through that today. Tomorrow, if we have time, we will go through that in terms of how we calculate a great eon. Perhaps it'll be beneficial, it's not certain. And so then we talk about a Buddha means someone who has the nature of the three, what is it? So someone who has such drive is someone who practices with diligence. And someone that's diligence will achieve the state of Buddhahood in this lifetime, or the Guru will give them the state of Buddhahood in this lifetime, or in the visible, then that is why it's so very kind. And now what it says about this in Lord Tsongkhapa's commentary is, because they bestow on other individuals through this Vajrayana, the state of Buddhahood that takes, if they practice this state of Buddhahood that is so difficult to attain, even no matter how you work. In Secret Mantra Trinity, they give it in this very lifetime. So for that reason, and so for the being who really strive, the person who gives it to you in this lifetime is the Guru, and so for that reason, you need to serve them with students. And so who do they give it to? They give it to supreme students whose diligence and effort blaze extremely. It's like they're the extremely great intelligence who work really hard. And so those are the people whom they give it to. The people who don't have diligence, they won't give it to people who don't have any diligence. So this stanza is in general about serving through gifts, or it's taught in connection with making offerings. However, in actuality, this stanza teaches the crux of why it is so important to serve the Guru through gifts, respect, and service, or in brief, by giving up everything from your own life to serve the Guru. It teaches the crux of the matter, teaches the reason for this. So in generally, in the Mahayana Sutras, it's taught that the spiritual friend spot is very important. It's not just in Tantra, it's also taught in the Mahayana Sutras that the spiritual friend is very important. And the reason in the Mahayana Sutras that is taught why the spiritual friend is so important is that if you don't have a spiritual friend, you will not know the methods for attaining Buddhahood. So a spiritual friend is extremely important. But in the secret mantra Vajrayana, following the Guru is even more important than following a spiritual friend in the Mahayana Sutras. So what is the reason for that? What is the particular? And so what is the particular reason for that? It is that in the sutras, it is you follow through the spiritual friend that one achieves Buddhahood. But even that, for bodhisattvas with sharp faculties, they must spend 3 uncountable eons, and those with middling 7. And those with dull faculties spend 33 eons gathering merit and purifying observations. So it takes an incredibly long time where they gather merit and purify obscurations. And then finally they're able to achieve that state of Buddhahood. But in the secret mantra is different. You can achieve it either 6 or in this lifetime or in 16 lifetimes or 60 lifetimes. And that ability to achieve that depends primarily upon the Guru. It comes from the kindness of the Guru. It comes from the blessings of the Guru. So for that reason, in the secret mantra of Vajrayana, the Guru is especially kind, considered especially kind. Now, in general, there is some debate in the sutras about whether one can or cannot achieve Buddhahood in one life through the path of the sutras. But in general, it's the ability to achieve Buddhahood in one lifetime on one body is said to be a particular quality, the unexcelled mantra. As it is said in the profound inner meaning by Karmapa Ranjan Dorje, Bodhisattvas who benefit all sentient beings in 3 uncountable. Here, by the distinction of the path of means, instead of the path of the transcendences, just knowing the methods of Kriya and Charya, it is just 16 human lifetimes. It is on the yoga 16 human lifetimes. Through the unexcelled is the diligent, to definitely achieve it in one single lifetime. So in the sutras, it's if you don't spend 3 uncountable eons gathering merit, you won't achieve Buddhahood. But if you can achieve it in 60 human lifetimes through the Kriya and the Charya tantras. Now, human lifetime here is what we mean. So we're talking about in terms of 100 years. So that's what we consider that. So it's 60 of these human lifetimes. So you can 60 you can talk about 60 lives. So it is achieving lifetime in that. Now in the Yoga Tantra, you can achieve Buddhahood in 16 human lifetimes. Through the unexcelled teachers, the diligent, if you are diligent, you can achieve it in a single lifetime or bodies. Or at least or even in 3 years and 3 years, 3 lunar phases in 3 days, it's taught. So if you think about it from one perspective, being able to achieve, whether you're able to achieve Buddha that quickly or not depends upon your degree of prajna that you have, the degree of diligence you have, but primarily in the unexcelled mantra, we have the superior skillful methods, and so it's related to those and to the Guru who teaches them. And for example, first of all, being able to enter the secret mantra is the kindness of an authentic Guru. And once you have received the empowerments that ripen and the instructions that liberate, it is also the Guru's kindness. And because you practice those all properly, your experience and realization qualities, those increase and not being overcome by Maras and obstacles, are all primarily based upon whether you've received the blessings of the Guru or not, whether you have supplicated the Guru or not. That's what they depend upon. In the very end, when you awaken, awakening is it's because of the Guru that you awaken to Buddhahood. It's like recognize the nature of your mind or not, whether it becomes manifest or not in this year, depends upon the Guru, and so the Guru is extremely important. And so for this reason, in the biographies of many different Gurus, as their experience and realization begins to increase even just a little bit, their faith in the Guru grows even stronger. And then they sing songs remembering the Guru's kindness and sing them over and over again. And we can see many of these in the lives of the masters of the past. So for example, when we think about it in terms of this lifetime, the parents who give us birth in this body, we consider them to be very kind. It's not that it's not a small kindness, that's a great kindness. And also, when we receive like a secular education in this lifetime, we're raised in that. It's also very important, right? And that becomes permanent. It's because it's primarily beneficial in this lifetime that we consider it to be important, right? Similarly, so when you have boyfriends or girlfriends or friends or if you have lovers or if you have or a husband and wife, no matter how much love they give each other in this lifetime, this benefits in this lifetime only, but in other lifetimes than this one, it's difficult for them to be of any benefit. And if things don't work out, it's quite possible that they'll be even more harmful in lifetime rather than beneficial. But if because of an authentic guru, we can, instead of waiting many lifetimes, but in this very lifetime, without spending a lot of time in this very lifetime, we can completely exhaust all the suffering in this lifetime and be brought to the unexcelled happiness of Buddhahood. There is no greater happiness than kindness in this world. No kindness more amazing than that in this world. And so when we think about, contemplate these reasons, we can realize that the ways the 50 verses teach us to follow the Guru really accord with the nature of things and really bring us great benefit in this and future lifetimes. If we don't have enough prajna or diligence to achieve Buddhahood in this lifetime, still, the moment we have entered the profound path of the secret mantra of Vajrayana, we can supplicate the Guru. And if we're able to supplicate the Guru and we're able to keep the vows, and then there's a great hope that we can achieve Buddhahood within a few lifetimes. There's something we can hope for there. We have an opportunity to do so. And so for that reason, it's crucially important that we do our absolute best to follow the Guru and to keep our samaya. This is extremely important. So we need to do our absolute best and gather all of our energies together to do this, to follow the Guru properly. So next, we don't just speak about those. Now the next one, we talk about how to keep continually keep, or how to ordinarily keep your samaya. This is 3 stanzas. And the first of these, it says, always keep your samaya, always offer to the Tathagatas, and always offer to the Guru. They are the same as all the Buddhas. And this is the correspondence of the Sanskrit, Tibetan, and English. Now, when you talk about the way to keep your verses continually, there are 3 verses to this. Now, these 3 verses are primarily connected to serving the Guru with gifts. The first stanza teaches that if you're a yogi who practices secret mantra, what you primarily must practice is that there are 3 main things you must always practice. And among these 3, the first of them, one of them, is always keeping your samaya. So the first is always keeping your samaya. Another is always making offerings to the Tathagatas. So you need to always make offerings to the Tathagatas. And the third one is that you must always make offerings to the Gurus. So we can talk about make offerings or give gifts. This is very important, it says. Now, the remaining stanzas teach that among the 3 types of samaya, it is especially important to make offerings to the Guru. And it also explains that That among the things and enjoyments that you offer, you should offer the nicest, the best, the most finest offerings to the Guru. Now, if we speak about the meaning of each of these three stanzas in detail, the first of them, according to the interpretation of the Sanskrit commentary, is that always keep your samaya, teaches that the activities that students must always perform always means continuously. It's continuously practice, so always means continuously. So at all times, continuously, you must practice or keep your samayas. When you talk about the word Tathagata, there are two different ways that it's described in the text in the Sanskrit commentary. One is that they have gone to suchness and then come from there, so they are Tathagatas. Alternately, they've become the cause of beings' benefit and have come having thus benefited beings, so they're called Tathagatas. So these are two different explanations. In any case, the word Tathagata means Buddhas. And the Buddhas, you should always offer to the Buddhas. So always means every day with various offerings. Or the always offer to the gurus means at all times. The guru means you're the master. You need to make offerings, so you need to proffer and give the gifts. You need to proffer gifts. You need to offer gifts. Now, if there are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, well, then why must also offer to the Guru? It says you have to offer to the Tathagatas, and wasn't that enough? And why do you have to offer to the Guru separately? What's the reason for that? And it says, for they are the equals of the Buddhas, or they are the same as all the Buddhas. So they means the Guru. They means the Guru. The equal to, or the same as all the Buddhas means that they're like all the Buddhas. They're equal to. They're the same as. They're the same as. They're equal to the Buddhas. So in this passage, in the Sanskrit commentary gives several reasons why the Guru and the Buddha are the equal or the same. But we don't need to speak about those today. Later, there's a passage on viewing the Guru as a good, and I think if we explain it then, it's more related to that and more logical to discuss it then. So I will explain them at that point. So this is the explanation in the Sanskrit commentary on the first of these stanzas. Now, what is Lord Tsongkhapa's interpretation? We think about Lord Tsongkhapa's interpretation. Always keep your samaya means the yoga of the body, speech, and mind of the special deity, or the samaya of the body, speech, and mind. And he's saying that among these, he said that always means that you must always remain within the inexhaustible virtue. You need to stay within the vows. You need to keep your vows, is what he's saying. The seventh Karmapacutta Gyatso says that always keep your samaya means that you have to keep the samaya of body, speech, and mind. When you talk about what is the samaya of body, speech, and mind, well, there's a passage in the Treasury of Knowledge that speaks about the passage on the mantra vows of the awareness holders, of the Vidyadharas. He says, well, the way it describes the samaya of the body is that because all sentient beings are by nature the body, speech, and mind, Vajra body, speech, and mind. So whether they're male or female, you should never scorn them. That is never scorning them, or is the samaya of the Vajra body. Likewise, to not make other sentient beings distress others, or to not make people not instigate regret, or to never harm other sentient beings, minds, and cause pain is the samaya of Vajra mind. Likewise, giving up insulting speech. And so when you speak to people, always instead of saying words that harm other people or that are unpleasant to their ears, say something that the people enjoy hearing. And this is the samaya of Vajra speech. Now, the sources that he gives for this is the ornament of Vajrakarma, Garba. Now, the ornament of Vajragarbha, the Tantra, the ornament of Vajragarbha, is actually among the different tantras that are sources for the 50 verses on the Guru. The Tantra of the ornament of Vajragarbha is an important source. So here when we say, always keep your samaya, if we understand it as taught in the Treasury of Knowledge as the samaya of body, speech, and mind, then I think that is a good way to understand it. Now, just as it talks about here, how important it is to follow the Guru, just as following the Guru is important, keeping samaya is also important. The reason why is that they depend upon each other. The basis of the samaya of the secret mantra is the Guru, and if you don't keep samaya, then there's no way that you're going to be able to provide the Guru with service. And so it's like keeping this mind and following the Guru or serving the Guru are related to each other. They're really closely connected. So there's no way that you can't pick that about keeping samaya or serving the Guru as which is more important. If you follow the Guru, you have to keep the samaya. If you keep samaya, then you have to follow the Guru. That's the way it is, right? Now, the second is always offered to the Tathagatas. This can said to mean the offering to the mandalas of Vajrasattva and so forth. Now, when we say Vajrasattva here, normally when we say Vajrasattva, we think about the deity who is well known to purify misdeeds and obscuration. We call him Vajrasattva. You can understand him like that, that's fine. But another way to understand Vajrasattva is that it doesn't mean a particular deity. Instead, in terms of the unexcelled secret mantra, the word Vajratendra mean Vajrasattva can also mean to refer to the level of Vajratara. So in that, if we practice the secret mantra Vajrana, we always need to continually invite the deities to the manda as a field of merit and make offerings to them. Alternately, you can go through the stages, the right and ground, the preparation, the actual practice, and so forth, perform like a mandala ritual. This we do like an extensive puja, a grand puja. And then we do the actual practice and so forth. And so when we do this, we do make the offerings and the praises as elaborate as possible. Some people, we don't have time and they get bored when we recite such long texts and so forth. Actually, the longer the offerings and praises, the better it is a way to perfect the accumulations, as many gurus, lamas have taught in their teachings on the creation phase. Likewise, it's through the mandala rituals that you then do the self-entry, right? And that self-entry is extremely important because and it is taught that the self-entry is extremely important as a way to eliminate breakages of samaya in the tantras and Sanskrit texts. So to tell a story about this, there was a lama of the Kagyu tradition named Sonam Gyaltsen, and he had his own notes, and in his notes, what he wrote, this is the Luipa tradition of Chakravarti, just that one tradition. He did the self-entry 230 times. He did the self-entry of the Chakrasamvara self-entry of the Krishnapada tradition 180 times, and the self-entry of the Gantapada tradition 350 times. So that is a history, right? And this is just an example. And likewise, there are certainly many lamas and monks who have done countless pujas and mantra rituals and taken the self-entry many times. There are an incredible number of people who do this. And likewise, there are all the monasteries of all traditions hold grand pujas, and they do the self-entry practice, and the reason is the same. It's not the same. It's not just that you're spending the whole day reciting. There's a reason for it, and it's important that we understand it. So the next is the second of the stanzas, and what the second one says is, Exhausted. This is the one. Now, the meaning of this is to explain it according to the second, according to the Sanskrit commentary, the second stanza is taught in order to instill enthusiasm for offering to the guru. It says anything that is desirable, it says. Now, this is according to the Sanskrit things. It says, always keep your smile, always offer to the Tathagata. Oh, excuse me. Those who want to offer anything that is desirable, or even the most superior, it says. So what it says, now according to it says anything, yat, it says the words yat, which means those who want, basically. It's like, it says the word yat twice. So it refers to things, wealth, grain, and so forth. So anything here means anything and everything. And so even slightly desirable, it says desirable, right? Now but it says desirable, but here it says that fits the mind. And I think this is a better. So if you say like it's attractive, and there's what's attractive to you or what is attractive to the guru is not clear. But if you say that something that is pleasing to them is something that the guru that pleases the guru or that makes them, so if it's like, so the question of saying it's desirable is it desirable to the guru and pleasing to the guru, not to oneself, not something that you like yourself. And so there was something that is desirable to the guru, something that is pleasable to the guru. Whatever you make an offering, is a question of whether it is desirable to the guru, whether it is pleasing to the guru or not. When it says that it's even the most superior, it means something that is a very good, wonderful things, that are the most extremely important things. We're talking about good things, the finest things. Now the aim of offering, or the reason why or the aim with which you do that is, as it says, those who want cannot be exhausted. Now what it says here in the word is a little bit. It says just this that is an exhausted, and this is a little better to understand, because just this that is inexhaustible. So just this here means something which is pleasing and separate of it. Understood it. As understood, it means like infinite, or cannot be exhausted means infinite, and those who want means those who seek that. Those who seek to please or wish to please the guru, this means the students. It basically means the things that any of the different things they offer will increase without ever being exhausted in this or future lifetimes. So if you offer to your guru, then the virtue of this, the virtue or the result of this will also be inexhaustible in future lifetimes and always increase more and more. So it says, when it says anything desirable, those who want just that cannot be exhausted. So it's not quite as fluent in the standard Tibetan translation. Now, Lord Tsongkhapa says of this that what cannot be exhausted means is the Dharmakaya of the Buddha. And those who desire that means that the students who desire to achieve the state of the Dharmakaya, they should do things that are desire. They should be understood what is desirable to you. So what is desirable to you? What you would be disappointed to give away. which you treasure and things that are even just a little bit superior. So whatever, if you don't have anything to offer, you have a wonderful thing if it's a small thing, or if you have a wonderful superior thing, whatever it is, you should offer it to the guru. And the guru should then also, in order to counteract the student's craving, the guru should, in order to stop the student's craving for that thing, the guru must accept them. Now, from the first chapter, the second book of the Samputa Tantra, it says that the guru has to take it in order to overcome the student's fixations. And so if the student has attachment to the thing, think this is important, this is significant, this is like the best thing, this is the most beautiful thing. Because they have that, when they offer to the guru, then the guru, needs to take it in order to counteract the student's attachment to it. So this is taught in the first chapter, the second book of the Samputa. Now I don't need to read the full stanza. Now, if we talk about the third stanza reads, the third stanza is this: to give to them perpetually is to perpetually give to all Buddhas. By giving to them, one gathers merit. The supreme siddhi comes from the accumulations. So here's the correspondence. This is it, right? Now, to explain this according to the Sanskrit commentators, to give to them means for reasons why it is inexhaustible. You say that it's inexhaustible to give into it cannot be exhausted. So if you give it to the guru, the thing or the enjoyment or the merit, it becomes inexhaustible. So here we're teaching why it becomes inexhaustible, why the merit will continue to increase. And the reason for that is that giving to the gurus is giving to all the Buddhas or giving to all the Tathagatas. It's the same as that. So what do we know? Aren't the gurus and the Buddhas different? The gurus, the guru, the Buddhas are Buddhas. They aren't the same, are they? So how can giving to the guru be giving to all the Buddhas? So offering to the gurus is the same as offering to the other gurus. So how is it logical that this can be so? And the reason is because the gurus and the Buddhas are indivisible. They're indivisible here means that the Buddhas and the gurus and the Bodhisattvas are indivisible in essence. They have different forms, but in actuality, there's no difference between them. Well, if that is so, then no matter what offer you to that guru is similar to the Buddha, there is a great necessity to do so. So what is that necessity? By giving the thing to the guru, by giving or pleasing the guru, then, or by giving something that is most superior, and through doing this, one gathers merit. So merit here means, we talk about among the two accumulations, we talk about the accumulation of merit. So now accumulations appears, so we talk about accumulating the accumulations of merit and wisdom. And when you gather the accumulations, then you achieve siddhi. So siddhis, there are two types. There are the inferior and the supreme. So there is the ordinary and the supreme, or here we're talking about the supreme siddhi, the siddhi of Mahamudra, the siddhi of completely perfect awakening of Buddhahood. This is the principle among all of them. So that is the interpretation in the Sanskrit commentary. Now, Lord Tsongkhapa's interpretation, if we think about how he explains it, the benefit of making offerings to the gurus because of always making offerings to the Guru, it's the same as always making offerings to the Buddhas, and for that reason you will gather the accumulation of merit. And because of gathering great accumulations, you then achieve the supreme among cities, Buddhahood. And so if you achieve that, then why bother speaking about the cities? We don't need to mention them. For this reason, the Guru is the superior field for gathering the accumulations of merit and wisdom. For example, and also from the 5 stages of blessing oneself, it's to abandon all offerings and begin to offer properly to the Guru. By pleasing them, you will achieve supreme omniscient wisdom. So this is saying you don't need to offer to anyone else. If offering to the Guru is the best way to make offerings. And it is the most supreme excellent offering, is what it says. And it also says, Tsongkhapa also says that, now as I mentioned, there are all the students from, therefore you should put all your efforts, from verse 15 to here to this comes from the accumulations. Here there are these stanzas. Except for the 6th of these, the rest of them are all found in the first 2 parts of the Shriparam Tantra. For example, there are 7 stanzas in the 50 verses. From there, you should put all your efforts to comes before the accumulations. There are 7 stanzas there. And among those 7 stanzas, except for the 6th stanza, the rest of them, the other 6 stanzas, always good. The 6th stanza is not taught in the Shriparam Tantra, but the others all are taught in the Shriparam, in the first 2 parts of the second part of the first 2 parts of the Shriparam. Likewise, also in the 6 stanzas, in the 7 stanzas, in the 50 verses, from therefore you put all your efforts to come to the answer to come from the accumulations. The 1st and the 5th stanza are also appear in the 13th chapter of the Panjara Tantra. So this is giving the sutra, the source. Now after this, I should kind of explain that we talked about above, to kind of, just summarize it all concisely. Basically, whether we're talking about your material wealth and what you cherish, what is really dear to you, what is like, so what you treasure most of all, or something that, whether you're offering something that pleases the Guru, or if there's something that's really precious, really valuable, if there are any things like that, in any case, you need to offer. In any case, you should offer them all to the Guru. And so primarily here we're speaking about serving the Guru through gifts. And so in that context, it says we have to make offerings to the Guru. So in general, in the world, when in our lifetime, if we want to benefit other people, there are many different ways we can do so. There are many different ways to benefit beings, but among them, the easiest way, or the most convenient, or the most important, among them, the most important is being generous. Giving the material things and wealth, or giving dharma, or giving safety, all of these all are generosity, right? And for this reason, Chandrakirti taught in the Entering the Middle Way that all beings desire happiness, and human happiness does not exist without enjoyments. Knowing that enjoyments come from given, the Buddha first taught about generosity. So he spoke about how generosity is so important and necessary. And so for this reason, he taught how important generosity is. So for this reason, what pleases an authentic Guru, one who has all the characteristics, what pleases them most is not offering material possessions. It's actually, what it pleases them most is not the material possessions. What they are most happy when you practice the Dharma. What pleases them most is offering material possessions. And for the student also, There are many ways to serve the Guru. The most important way to do this is to practice the instructions that the Guru has practiced as they taught them. That's the most important thing, right? However, for the time being, there are times when pleasing the Guru and accumulating merit, recalling the Guru's kindness, expressing gratitude. Among the different ways to do this, one way is to make offerings to the Gurus as like a sign of your gratitude, to make an offering. And to talk about this in an easy way. And then this can be really meaningful, right? However, when you think about it, when talking about making an offering, when you make an offering to the Guru, we speak about this quite a bit, but it might sound like it's a way for the Guru to, seem like a way for the Gurus to accumulate wealth. It's like, they get a lot of things, offerings, and they enjoy themselves. And when they live in this way, then it seems to be like contradict the Buddhist teachings on contentment with little and being satisfied with what you have and avoiding the extremes of indulgence and sexual pleasures. There's a danger that it might seem like that. And moreover, in addition, what's even worse or an even uglier message is that when the students live in luxury and the disciples live in poverty, then if someone looks at it, it's like, it just doesn't look good. It's something that people are going to criticize, that people are going to complain about. So this is a danger that this will happen. It's possible this will happen. And we all know clearly that this is so. And so in terms of this, if we think about in terms of lamas and chulkus, the offerings that things people get rid it's important that they make the offerings to make that meaningful, and the sponsors to make the offerings in order to complete the accumulation, to get the accumulations themselves in order to benefit sentient beings. And so if they at the very least, is that if it does not benefit the doctrine and sentient beings, at the very least, it must not harm themselves or others. If we think about it in terms of the Guru, or whether we think about it in terms of the student, this is very important. So for this reason, when it says in the 50 verses that we need to make great offerings to the Gurus, it says that if there's a Guru who has all the characteristics, if someone doesn't have any greed or any attachment to the wealth or possessions, it's impossible. It's possible for them to have the attachment if they're an authentic Guru. So they always think, how can I benefit the disciple? They only have the thought, how can I benefit others? And they need to be someone who's only engaged in meditation practice. And so for such a Guru, no matter how many offerings they receive, they will use them in accordance with the Dharma. Using them in accordance is like, making material and wealth meaningful. And so you need to use a way to make the material offerings in a meaningful way. For example, there's a biography of Drikung Jigten Sumgon in the Lhotam Religious History. And what this says is, it says that Drikung Jigten Sumgon, basically, he never had anything other than his 3 Dharma robes and his alms bowl. He didn't have any other things that he thought of saying, this is mine, this is my thing. He had no attachment or any fixation on anything, or regret. So he didn't have any. But he'd use the auspicious connections of all the things that he had in order for other people to do this. He would take the offerings that people would offer him, And the mitzvah not only would take them, then he would not let them go to waste. He would make sure that the offerings were not wasted, but he would use and made sure that they were not used improperly, as it is said. So, for that reason, if you have a guru with all the characteristics, no matter what offering you give to them, it is actually instead of keeping it for your all of your things for yourself, instead it's actually better, more meaningful than keeping them for yourselves. Likewise, the disciples too should always be beneficial to them in terms of counteracting their attachment. For example, normally you might have your things, some important things, some sacred things, and the things that you couldn't give to anyone else, so that you treasure so much you couldn't give them. But when you meet an important guru, and if you think you feel great faith for them, and you're saying, I'm going to give them this thing that is important to me, and if you offer to them, then from one perspective, this is beneficial for you in giving up your attachment and fixation. Another perspective is that, and if you, instead of keeping it for yourself, you give it to the guru, if it's an authentic guru and who has a great prajna, as soon as it comes into their hands, then there's actually nothing more meaningful, or they can use it for ways that are more meaningful. There's an opportunity that it can be even more significant. And so for this reason, when you have like a guru and a disciple who have, all the qualifications come together, then you should serve them as taught in the 50 verses about how to serve the offer through gifts, through paying respect, through service and practice. All of these ways of serving the guru can happen, and they will definitely happen well. Otherwise, if you do the opposite, if the guru spends all their time living in comfort, doesn't practice, doesn't keep their discipline, doesn't keep their samaya, and always make their students work, or makes them accumulate wealth, or make them do political things, or allows them to indulge in attachment and aversion, then there's no way that this fulfills the proper characteristics of the guru-disciple relationship taught in Buddhism. In addition, there is, as taught by Rutan Pema Karpo in his text for the Ultimate Service, says that they should be abandoned like poison in the hell rooms. This is said in many other tantric texts and scriptures. And so this is also something we need to understand. Likewise, also within Je Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path, and it talks about the 3 ways of pleasing the guru. It says that we have to make material offerings to the guru. At that point, what it says is that Gyaltsab or Geshe Lakshorwa said, if you have some good things that you could offer, but you give an inferior thing, then it violates Samaya. However, if you only have inferior things, then the guru will be pleased with it. Instead, they'll be pleased with but if the guru will be more pleased by the inferior thing, or you only have the inferior thing, then that is fine. Likewise, from the student's perspective, in order to gather the accumulations, you need to offer it all the time. But from the guru's perspective, the guru must not have any attachment or any craving for it. And the source for this is cited as the Geshe Sharawa. And what Geshe Sharawa said is that, so a guru is one who is pleased by practice and does not look even a little bit at material offerings. The opposite, it cannot be a guru who guides you to liberation. What we need by an authentic guru is one who is happy when you practice the Dharma properly. If not someone who likes offerings, who likes things. That's not what we mean by a guru. And so for that reason, Is a guru who is an authentic guru is one who is pleased by practice, by when you practice properly and does not care about small material offerings. Likewise, when you think about what is the way that gurus should guru and disciple should exchange offerings to show respect to each other. The eighth Karmapa Mixture writes in his 100 Short Instructions, he says that in the past, the Kagyu masters of the past, once they began following a right guru, whatever possessions they had, they wouldn't hold on them as being mine. As soon as they offered them, they would give them to the guru. Because whenever they got something from someone else, and so if there's something that someone else considered it precious and gave them to you, this primarily came about because of the gurus. Now, this happens to be that being there came from the guru, the being offered came from the guru, and so with complete firm commitment, as soon as they received it, they would give it to the guru. When they offered it to the guru, if the root guru was present, they could actually offer to them, right? But if the root guru is not present, they would take whatever, if they got a little bit of resources or wealth, they would use them for the anniversaries of there's the anniversaries of the guru passing away, or they would use it for, or they would take them to the guru's monastery and offer them. Aside from, they wouldn't even, if they're only drinking a glass of water, before they would make an offering of it to the guru. If they only had like one small little piece of marabeln fruit, that little tiny piece of marabeln, or these just like only a piece of fruit, they would turn it towards the guru and offer it to the guru, and then they would place it facing towards the guru. So in brief, there's even if you have no attachment to things, for the sake of the gurus, even if you only had a spoon to eat with, or if you have a little few things, if a little counter on your mala, in order for that, those we have very nice ones, right? This is what it says. So for that reason, even if we're only speaking of, we have the tradition of making an offering, even if we're only drinking a cup of tea. And there's a really important point here. The reason is that even if all we are having is a pour of a cup of tea, it came because of the kindness of the guru and the three jewels. And so for that reason, we offer to the gurus and the three jewels, and then with the blessings of that, and then out of the connection with this, we enjoy it and drink it ourselves. And so this is really beneficial for us to purify the obscurations of offerings. Like when you receive something, whether it's good food or whether it's a rich meal or whether it's, or even it's a kind of an simple meal, you make an offering. You don't think it's not thinking it's all for me. Instead, first you make an offering of it. And so this is in order to purify the obscurations of offerings. And also to make offerings to the gurus. And so this is the type of offering that we make, right? And so in this way, in the biographies of many gurus, it is said that whatever offerings that we give, we should be offered to the guru in person if they're there. And if that's not person, then we make offerings for the sake of fulfilling the guru's intentions. For example, when the first Lord of Dharma, Dusun Khenpa, first met Gampopa, he didn't have much to give. Basically had a flower and like 10 katas, nothing else. Because he was like a poor mendicant, he didn't have anything to give. But in the later part of his life, when he went to Kham, he went to Kampo Nenang, he went to his homeland, then his activities flourished. And because of that, many people gave him offerings. He took all of these offerings, and so a few of them, even before he left his home, he sent to Dahlak Gampo to make the offering, to make the offerings to Dahlak Gampo Monastery. In the end, the old, when he was already very old, and he was in his 70s, he returned to central Tibet. And one of the reasons why he went back to central Tibet is going to take some of the offerings that he received and offer them to the guru's monastic seat. So that's why he went. Now, at that time, the second time that Dusum Khyentse went from Kham to Dahlak Gampo, at that time, the second time that he went, when he went to central Tibet, at that time at Dahlak Gampo was no longer there. Gomsulu was there. Both of them had passed away. But still, Dusum Khyentse went and offered 100 volumes written in gold, 100 zo, 100 horses, a large turquoise, and all so forth. These precious and sacred objects that he offered. And this is one story of making offerings to the gurus. Likewise, Dusum Khyentse, on his own part, he didn't have any attachment to any things. And there's another example about how that is. So Dusum Khyentse passed away on the third day of the tiger month in the year of the ox. So he passed away on the third day, so 2 days before that day that he passed away, so which means the first month of the tiger month. At this point, when he gathered some of his most important disciples, including Geshe Tsangso, and he left his last testament to them. And what he said is, the only things that I possess, I don't have any, except for this robe that I'm wearing my body, these clothes, and I have a hand mill for grinding tsampa. And I think that it was Gampopa who must have given him this hand mill. So basically, he only had the clothes he wore, and he had this hand mill for grinding barley flour. But other than that, everything else he had belonged to the Sangha. He said there's the 25 song, the silver, turquoise, silver zos, and horses and cooking utensils, and you should take them. And so you have to make them. So in order to make tsampa, you need barley, and so sell all of them and buy barley, and then give that barley to the monks as a distribution to them. And you should stay here for a year or two after I stay there. And at that time in Tsurpo, so later, Tsurpo was considered to be a very remote place. Now, during Dusum Khyentse's times, it was even more remote. It's like the remotest of remote places. And so Dusum Khyentse, while he was staying there, because he stayed there, there are many people who were coming. But in general, people usually didn't come. They only came when Dusum Khyentse was there. So he specifically said his last testament that you need to stay here for a year or two. And when he said this, at that time, Pun Zhangsen asked him, so will there'll be people who stay in this people? And he asked him, are people going to come to like a remote place like this out in the boondocks? And when he said this, and Dusum Khyentse stood up straight up, he opened up his eyes bright and he looked. And can't they at least stay for at least 1 or 2 years, he said. And he said this very strictly. And so for that reason, and that Tsurpo was an extremely remote location. And it was difficult for people to stay there, I think. So at that point, Dusum Khyentse himself had many people come and give him offerings, and from his own perspective, the only things that he thought of his own were the robes he wore and his handmill for grinding tsamba flour. And so that's very clear. Likewise, there's also Talung Tampa Tashipel. He was born in actually a rather wealthy family. Now, when he went Pamadrupa Doji Gyapo, he had gold and other things to offer to him. And later, when he established the Talung monastery and his activities flourished, he had a lot of people come and give him offerings. And he sent this to 4 times. He had 4 great offerings that he sent to Pamadrupa. He did these great offerings 4 times, it said. It said that 100 sang of gold that he offered as butter lamps. At the time of his death, he said that all of his belongings should be dedicated to the Pamadrupa monastery. So please give them to that monastery, he said. But the students requested him and said that please keep a little back so that you can fulfill your intentions. Other than that, the rest of it was all sent to the monastery of Pamadrupa Monastery. There are many other such stories. There's Dusum Khyentse, Chitan Tikun Chikitan Sungun, Talung Tampa. These gurus, from one perspective, they were gurus. From another point of view, in relation to their gurus, they were disciples. And so the gurus were, in terms of being a guru, they're authentic gurus. In terms of being a disciple, they're an authentic disciple. In terms of this way, at least we can understand that it's important to understand how this works. So that is enough for today.